Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Tropical Nectar Long Fermentation Process Colombia from Luna Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Luna, based out of Langley, British Columbia, and this is now their third year being featured on this channel. As the first year we reviewed their Strawberry Sundae, and last year we reviewed their Techno Peach, as well as Blue Raspberry coffees. And it's safe to say we're going to continue reviewing their coffees as they are one of our favorite Canadian coffee roasters out there, and they seem to be a fan favorite of you guys as well, as you tend to respond pretty positively towards our Luna reviews, and I've heard from a couple of you that Luna is also one of your favorite coffee roasters. So any opportunity we get to find one of their coffees at a local multi-roaster, I typically tend to pick one up, as you never know what you're going to get. This is a great example of that coffee, so I'm looking forward to discussing this one. This right here is day 25 of this coffee. Recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 203 degrees Fahrenheit through the V60. They are on the lighter side of Canadian coffee roasters, so a light Canadian for the roast profile. And let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 7, first impression, a little funky, a little tropical, a little sweet, a little acidic, a little out there based off of that first try. One of the notes I had very early on was that there was a pretty quick drawdown, so we made sure to adjust slightly finer for this cup of coffee. And the flavor profile I could most closely align this with was, well, a slight tropical banana. Now this coffee reminded me a lot of a couple of the black and white coffees we had last year, the Ugandan, the anaerobic, and the the natural and the anaerobic natural Ugandan coffees. And both of them had this kind of interesting, like banana-like taste to them. So that's what it reminded me of the most, and felt that maybe some adjustments were going to need to be made because there was a lot of potential in this cup of coffee based off of that first impression. Day 9, higher temperatures, ran it to the Chemex, and there are always pros and cons to the Chemex, but in this case I was feeling a lot less of the funkiness, which was a pretty nice positive, but at the same time it felt like a watered down version of the first time we had tried this coffee. So it was slightly diluted and felt that it was a little bit of a tricky coffee. We're going to continue adjusting and see what we might be able to get from this one. Day 10, ran it through the V60 at lower temperatures, and there was a slight bit of booziness in the cup, and I will attribute the booziness to just a slight bit more rest for this cup of coffee, as it wasn't there in the early days. But then it started making an appearance the more this coffee was rested. So our main objective for this cup of coffee was to kind of maximize and amplify the sweetness while reducing the booziness that was coming from it, and just basically looking for an ideal sweet spot. Day 12, ran it back through the Chemex, and this is why I felt that way, that the booziness was a component of a slight bit of rest, was because it was now present in the Chemex as well, and it was really amplified, both the booziness as well as the acidity in this cup of coffee, and those are two things I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of. Reminded me a lot of, well, the rum-like banana taste. So I've mentioned before I'm not the biggest alcohol drinker, but back when I used to drink maybe a slight bit more, my favorite spirit was rum, and Jamaican rums have this kind of interesting banana funkiness to it. That's the best way I can describe this sort of alcoholic, tropical taste to this coffee. I don't mind it, actually. Given that rum was my favorite spirit back in the day, it shouldn't be too surprising that if a coffee comes out a little bit more rum-like as opposed to, I don't know, wine-like, of course I'm going to like it a little bit more. So I thought it was okay. Day 16, a fair bit more rest. As you can see, 4 days difference at this time. Brewed it back through the V60, and a lot of the booze has been toned down, which is definitely a positive thing for me. It is now slight equal parts booziness and funkiness. So at this point I would trade funkiness for booziness any day because I'm actually tired of the booziness, but the funkiness is actually a little fun given that it hasn't been as present as the booziness has over the last year. The entire cup reminds me of a range of things, including the El Paraíso coffees I'd had from Black and White a couple years ago, which were wildly funky, but they had some fun mango fruits to them as well. In addition, the funky banana from Jamaican rums, as well as alcoholic cocktails, so 3 very interesting, diverse, and out there sort of things. Day 18, what I felt was, as the coffee cools down, that's when I like it the best. A lot of the booziness really sort of settles once you just let the coffee get to room temperature, and in its place it's a lot sweeter of a cup of coffee. So I don't necessarily enjoy drinking it right off the brew, but when it has cooled down quite a bit, I enjoy the flavor of this cup a lot more. Day 23, ran it through the Chemex for the last time, and yeah, the Chemex really seems to amplify the booziness that's coming from this cup of coffee. So I've kind of noticed that the Chemex from time to time can really increase the overall booziness of so many coffees. So that's why a lot of the anaerobics and naturals, I don't necessarily like them as much in the Chemex as I do even some of the wash processed coffees. So I don't think it was the ideal brew method for this coffee, but at the same time it was reminiscent of a, again, tropical fruit cocktail, as well as having a heavy bit of both those tropicals as well as booziness. I mean, it's been pretty consistent to that sense. Day 24, final notes we have, the cup has maintained every bit of its vibrancy and intensity. Even on day 25, it's still there. It's a very strong, lasting cup of coffee. Enjoy the most as it's cooled down by far. Most dominant characteristic still remains a very strong citric acidity, complementing a slight bit of funky tropical fruits. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. This is a fun looking tasting wheel. All right, let's discuss it. 2 level 5s. So the finish and the citrus fruit, not surprising. So many of the anaerobic processed coffees, these longer fermentation processed coffees, have that level 5 finish. This one is no exception to that rule, but this is a much better finish than so many of those other coffees, as this one's not as overbearing as a lot of the other ones are. And then the citrus fruit at a level 5, whatever the fruit that's coming from this cup of coffee is, it's most closely reminiscent of citrus fruit for me. As you see, the stone fruit is at a level 4, and we kind of briefly touched on the mango, but it definitely has that kind of sugary mango sweetness that I've experienced from quite a few coffees. It's definitely present, most notably the Mario Moreno. It's very much there in this cup of coffee. And banana is technically a berry fruit, so that's why the berry fruit is a level 4. Mentioned so much about the banana, this kind of rum-like banana that was coming from this cup of coffee. So yeah, definitely there. Acidity, level 4, not surprising. They can be a little high on the acidity, but the sweetness at a level 4 as well. We've said before, as long as you balance those two things out, I don't mind having a lot more acidity in a cup of coffee. Cleanliness, level 2, not surprising on that either. And body, definitely a lower bodied cup of coffee, but for the most part, yeah, fun looking tasting wheel, little out there, but I actually quite like the way that it looks. All right, overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I mean, you could probably assume that it wasn't necessarily a coffee I enjoyed, but that would not necessarily be the case. I kind of liked this coffee, and I liked it because it's not overbearing the booziness. The biggest issue I've had with the overly boozy coffees is that that's exactly the point. They're overbearing, they're dominant, you don't get too much of the other characteristics that come from them. And this one right here, while having a slight bit of the booziness, you were able to still taste so much of the fruit sweetness that was coming from this cup of coffee. And as a result, it just kind of gave it a little bit more distinct and unique profile than so many of the other super fermented cups of coffee. And coupling that with it being a more rum-like cup of coffee as opposed to a wine-like cup of coffee, that was a nice little selling point to me. So I think in that sense, it does stand a little bit out there on its own for these fermented coffees. And as a result, I actually did enjoy it. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to is the person I've been kind of circling around this entire time. Think super concentrated tropical fruit juice, and think of it in a slight bit of an alcoholic form, rum-like. And if you like that, that's a pretty nice fit for you. I actually quite liked it. So those components combined, it worked out in an interesting but enjoyable sense for me anyway. So keep those things in mind, lighter profiled, and it's going to be a little on the acidic side as well. But I think I'm going to leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Tropical Nectar Long Fermentation Processed Colombia from Aluna Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.